Spain and Jorge Vilda has named their 30-player preliminary squad for the World Cup. So let's talk about it. Monday, June 12th, Jorge Vilda was set to name his 30-player preliminary squad for the Women's World Cup. There's a lot of tension on which players are going to be in, which players are going to be out, which players are still protesting, and we got a lot of our answers today. From the 15 players that stepped aside from the national team in a sign of protest against the federation, as well as Jorge Vilda, we saw a few drop into the squad with the likes of Irene Paredes, Jenny Hermoso across the few months of call-up. And today we saw the likes of Alexia Putellas, Aitana Bonmati, Mariana Caldente, Anna Battier are back in the squad. On the other hand, there's 4 players who forfeited the World Cup and they said they're not available for selection, included Patrick Gajoro, Mapi Leon, Claudia Pina, as well as Lola Gallardo. According to some sources, there's other players from those 15 players that made themselves available and were not chosen, with the likes of Sandra Peños, Laila Alexandri, Lucia Garcia, Leila, and Andrea Peray. Now, this is a very interesting situation because there's a lot of floating questions in terms of what happens to this idea of protesting, what happens to the cause of wanting for better and punishing the federation. Is it going to divide the players that have forfeited to the players that have put themselves available? Is the federation going to see this as a win and kind of continue doing what they're doing, which is dismiss a lot of the players' concerns and even blame them for a lot of what's happening? Is this going to be the last chance that Vilda is going to have in terms of if he doesn't have a good performance at the World Cup? What happens then? There's a lot of floating questions. Something that is very important to remember is that we cannot be taken away by the recent talks in the last week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of how the players and the Spanish Federation have negotiated, because this cause has been happening since September of last year. Like, this has been going on for months and months and months. 15 players sent the federation a letter talking about how the management of Vilda has been damaging their mental well-being and their physical health. They were feeling a lot of distrust with the federation and they're seeing a lot of lack of commitment of where this team is going to go. To remind you, Vilda has been with the squad for over 7 years and he has never won a major competition with them. In fact, he's never taken them to a semi-final, let alone a final in a major competition. Again, you're talking about Spain. I mean, you look at these players, not just now, in the past 5 or 6 years, and not a single trophy has come out of them. So absolutely there's a lack of commitment. Absolutely there's things to be questioned. And the players rightfully 100% put that in front of the federation and said, listen, if these concerns are not addressed, we're not going to come back. The Spanish Federation, in a typical Spanish Federation way, said that this is completely unacceptable. We do not support any of those claims and you guys are rebellious for doing this against your nation. And I quote the Federation, who released a statement addressing the letter with the 15 players. They said, failure to attend a team call is classified as a very serious infraction and can lead to a sanction of between 5 to 5 years of disqualification. If that is not a threat, I do not know what could be classified as a threat. This was said back in September, and in a way the federation has had pretty much the same attitude towards the players, saying, well, you know what, you want to stay away, that's okay, we can build our own squad. You know what, you want to stay away with your ludicrous accusations, do it. We've got players who are going to support us and back us up. And so the Spanish Federation has pretty much played me versus you since September, and I think when you see threats like that, when you see attitudes like that, you wonder what the conversation was happening between them and the players behind the scenes that led to some of them making themselves available. And during this time, Vilda and the Federation have said, we're not going to have the players question Vilda's management. He's a very, very important role to this program. We need to have him here, and we're just simply not going to accept any criticism of improving our program, which is quite interesting and important to note that the head or the president of the Spanish Federation's women's national team, the person who's supposedly leading the program, is actually Vilda's father. So it's almost like you're going to this federation complaining about the management of X, Y, and Z, and turns out that the father of X, Y, and Z is the one making all these decisions. So it's hard to not see how the players would feel frustrated, and it's hard not to see how the players were just talking and nothing were coming back in rewards. In recent days and earlier this week, the players that made themselves available sent a letter to the federation highlighting certain requirements that will need to be done for them to come back. These requirements have not been publicly disclosed, they haven't been talked about, they haven't been released or anything, so really knowing what happened behind closed doors or what this decision meant or how it happened is hard to speculate, and I don't think we should speculate. None of these players are winners here because you've got players in their prime forfeiting the World Cup. I mean, literally the World Cup. Players like Lola probably don't even have a World Cup in the next few years in their careers. And then you've got other players who have had to cut a lot of corners to put themselves in an environment they know is not trusted, they know it's toxic, to go to the World Cup. So in a way, none of these players are winners. Those who forfeited and those who didn't forfeit, they're not doing what they're not doing what the ideal situation would look like. In other words, maybe the RFAF won this battle, which is extremely disappointing, and it's hard to really point the finger at the players and call them selfish and they want the money and X, Y, and Z, because this is the World Cup. It's hard for us to say, oh, this is selfish because X, Y, and Z, because we're not players. We don't have a World Cup ahead of us. We don't have these big decisions to make. And it's a lot of these amendments, again, have not been disclosed. These requirements, we don't know what they are. So there's a lot of if and who's and what's that we still don't know, including this very, very important letter with the requirements. This is going to have massive ripple effects in terms of players who are going to grow the game in the world. In Spain itself are stepping out. Players who are stepping in, they're having a lot of backlash around them purely because the RFAF is not willing to listen to the players. And I wonder, in 10 to 15 years, I wonder how, looking back at today, you've got this golden generation whose the federation has failed, the management has failed, Vilda has clearly lost all control of his locker room. On top of that, Spain is a massive market of football. They bleed football, and when you're doing all this toxicity, a lot of fans get driven away from it. A lot of fans that are maybe getting integrated into the sport actually step away because they're like, what is this absolute mess? What's there to support? They need to figure it out before I become a fan. It drives a lot of potential buyers and potential people from joining into the sport. And what's worse is that this is not the first time that a manager has lost control of their locker room and they've got federation backup. This happened with Karim Diakar for as long as it did, until it was the tipping point, and you wonder when is going to be the tipping point for the Spanish Federation. And this happened a few years ago with Ada Hegerberg in Norway. She did not go to the 2019 World Cup out of protest of what the federation was offering to the players. A few years back, it happened with Ireland, with the US. It's currently also happening with Canada as they try to figure out long-term and short-term solutions. And so this isn't, unfortunately, a one example like, oh, look at this federation, they're unable to figure it out with the players. No, this happens with almost every single federation, and players are being forced to miss the World Cup. I mean, the players that are forfeiting possibly have a Ballon d'Or in them. Ada Hegerberg, a Ballon d'Or winner, missed the World Cup purely because the federation is okay with providing mediocrity to their players. Not even mediocrity at this rate, honestly. It's way below par, way below mediocrity. It's so disappointing and so disheartening to see. What's going to happen in the next few weeks? What's going to happen in the World Cup? What's going to happen after the World Cup? If Vilda is unable to win something with this group, I mean, if you don't sack him, then we all must riot. Whoever's not rioting already, we have to riot. Vilda is a really unpleasant man who's been given this position of power. He has been provided a lot of privilege in the federation purely because of his father's position. The money and backing he has got, other federations and other head coaches would simply dream of, and what he has done is do nothing but harm the players mentally and physically, provide no success whatsoever in terms of silverware, create a massive disconnect between the federation and the fans, and have an even bigger disconnect between the players themselves. What will surface in the next few weeks, in the next few days, how the players react to it will be very interesting to see. This is not an ideal situation, definitely not how you want to see a nation that has all the talent and all the players and all the skills they could have to win it on the field and to win the World Cup, being ruined by higher-ups that simply don't want their egos to be hurt and can be bothered to provide their players what they're asking for, which is the bare minimum. You should not go into training camp feeling any kind of mental or physical distrain and distress on yourself. This is not how it should be. A federation that's allowing that should be very embarrassed in themselves, and I just hope the players are dealing well with it, the players who have forfeited the World Cup and the players who are going into the World Cup. But definitely a massive shout out for those who are stepping away from the World Cup. This is one of the most prestigious competitions in the sport, if not the most prestigious competition in the sport. Players work their entire life off to get to this point, to be able to represent their country, and most importantly, represent their at this big stage, and that being taken away from you is simply not a fun thing to be going through. I just can't even imagine. I want to hear your opinions on this. What do you think? How do you think that 23 player squad's gonna look like? Share your opinions down below. I've also got a very fun series launching very soon, talking about the groups of the World Cup as we prepare and get excited for what's going to be one of the most historical events of the decade. There's going to be a lot of surprises in these videos and group stages talks, so definitely keep your eyes tuned and subscribe if you haven't already, because you don't want to miss it. It's going to be so much fun. You do not want to miss it. As always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter, and I will see you later.